I'm the highest in the room. Hope I make it out of here. We ain't stressing about the loot. My block made a quesadilla. This not the molly, this the boot. Ain't no coming back from here. Little life
Gentlemen, to episode 39 of Diamond and the Rough Sports Talk. For today's special guest, we're the sports editor for the NOLA Advocate, the St. Tammany Farmer, and also VSN Louisiana, Mr. Jim Derry. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be on, gentlemen. Glad to be on.
Yes, sir. Can you tell us how you and your family are holding up thus far during this pandemic?
It's been a strange time. You talk about me being the sports editor of the St. Tammany Farmer, which obviously is a branch of the Times-Picayune and New Orleans Advocate. I've been on furlough since the middle of March, so it's been a tough time for me professionally. I've been doing some things for VSN Louisiana to keep myself busy. I've been learning how to be a stay-at-home dad, which is something that I haven't done a whole lot of, to be honest, because I'm usually go. And taking care of my two girls while my wife works a lot. But we're all fine. Everybody's healthy at home here. But I'm ready to get back to work, man. I'll tell you, I'm ready. I hope the LHSA comes out and says we're ready to go, because I'm ready to go. I'm ready for football to get started. I'm ready for sports to get back in session. I was glad to hear the NBA announced today that they were coming back July 31st. I hope baseball follows suit, and hopefully we'll have football schedule. We'll have NFL. We'll know what the NFL's doing real soon.
Definitely. I definitely can say we're all looking forward to, sports to get back in action.
No doubt.
Never build a floor is not yours.
What is the most difficult part of being a sports journalist?
Well, right now, I think the most difficult part is just the whole picture of what's going on in our profession. And it's hard to find a way to make a living these days. When I first got into this business, it was a long time ago, 1990, as a matter of fact. It'll be 30 years ago this summer. It was easy. Well, I wouldn't say it was easy, but it was a lot easier than it is now. It was a lot easier to make a living doing this. If that's what you really wanted to do, you went to school, you become a journalist, and it wasn't that hard to find a job. You worked your way up, and but now there's so many different platforms there, and a lot of these platforms, you'd have to find ways to make money, as I'm sure you gentlemen are trying to figure that out right now. Making money doing what you want to do and what you love to do. And so the main thing for me in this profession is just trying to find a way to make it work with my family. And if I didn't have a wife that had an excellent job, it would be so much tougher for me, because actually I make less money today than I made 15 years ago. So that's where we are these days. And that's not to discourage anyone from doing their dream or doing what they love, because if you love this, you can find a way to make it work. But that's the key. You have to love it. And so that's been the most challenging part for me, is the financial aspect of it. But I wouldn't trade it for the world. I'm trying every day to make sure that I can stay in it. I've been, like I said, 30 years in. I'd love to do it for at least 20 more.
Well, you already answered, my next question, because my next question was, is this, a long-term goal for you to keep doing within the next 20 years or plus, or 15 years, leading up to 20 years? But you didn't just really answer that question.
Well, and really the hardest part about it is, when you talk about wanting to do it for 20 more years, or any time, it's like, I'm sure you guys know a little bit about, I've been with the Times-Picayune almost my entire career. We've had some times when I got laid off and I was out, and then they took me back. This is actually my third stint with the Times-Picayune. And so, when this first all started, when we had the big layoffs back in 2012, they were announced. And so every year it's almost like, I feel like I'm a football player almost, to the extent of any day you could be called and they could say, bring your playbook. It's almost like that. So I'm just trying to stay in it any way I can. You know, I never did any broadcasting until about 6 or 7 years ago. I found that I love that as much as or more than I love the writing aspect of it. That's helped me extend my career. And so I'm trying to find ways to make sure that I can go 20 more years. We'll see if it's financially viable. But when you're an old goat like me and you've been doing it for 30 years, there's not a lot else I know how to do. It's not like I can just, you know, I'm almost 52 years old. I can't just pick up and go back to college and try to find another profession. It's pretty hard at this point in time. So I'm just trying to find a way to make it work.
What advice would you give to someone who's seeking to become a sports journalist?
I would say number one, make sure you love this, and this is really what you want to do, because like I said, with the financial aspect of it, if you love something, you can make it work. If you have the passion and one thing that is good about today is you can find different ways to make things work. With all the social platforms like you guys are doing here, you can find things that you can make your voice be heard, and people will want to not only follow you, but you know, the advertising dollars and all that is going to follow later on if you have a passion. Because if you have a passion, that's what's going to make people want to listen to you. And it's like anything else in life. You've got to want it. You got to have a good reason to want to do it, not just because it sounds cool to be a sports journalist or to be a broadcaster, or to be a podcaster or whatever it is. If you don't love what you're doing and you don't have passion for what you're doing, it's not going to work. So that's what I would say is, number one, to make sure that you want to do it. And number two, just to find the ways to make it work. And with all the information that's out there today, you can find ways to make things work.
Did you ever play any type of high school sports or collegiate sports? If so, can you name all the sports you played and what positions you played?
You know, interestingly enough, I didn't decide I wanted to play baseball, and I didn't start playing until right before my senior year. So I was a first baseman and a catcher, and I pitched a little bit. But it was more really after high school that I started playing more on kind of intramural levels. And I did that for about 10 or 15 years. I played on the intramural level, mostly as a pitcher and a first baseman. I played a little soccer in high school. I wasn't very good at it. I didn't like coaches telling me I had to run 3-4 miles a day just to be a goalie. And so that ended up not really being my thing. But I ended up coaching a lot. I started coaching when I was 15 years old. I coached Little League baseball and Little League soccer for about a little over 10 years. And that was a passion. It was while I was getting into the business, which just so happened. But really, my thing was music. I was in the band. I ended up being in the band at LSU, and it helped pay for part of college. I loved it. And, you know, so music was more my thing. I was never the greatest athlete. I wasn't the worst, but I wasn't the greatest athlete. And so I realized pretty early on that music was a way to keep involved with sports. As being, obviously, there's the band there for football, band for basketball, and it was my ticket into college. Help with my ticket into college.
So, for my next question, you cover baseball a lot, correct?
Yeah.
So, when I say the name Austin Echo, what does that name mean to you? When I say that name.
Say that again.
When I say the name Austin Echo, what does that name mean to you when I say that name?
I don't know that name. I have to tell you, I don't know that name. Tell me again.
Austin
Tell me, why should I know it?
He's currently the 29th ranked baseball player in the nation. He attends John Curtis. He played third baseman. He played pitcher. He's just a dog. He played all over the field.
Now, see, let me tell you, the last 3 years specifically, I've been more focused on the North Shore stuff. So the last time I covered Curtis on a regular basis was when they won the state championship, the first one they won a couple years ago. So it's been a little. Now I've covered more softball on the South Shore than I've covered on the North Shore the last couple of years. But and I've actually been more focused on softball. But yeah, now that you say it, I know who he is. But John Curtis is obviously a juggernaut in a lot of sports, especially besides football, obviously girls basketball, and where they've won 4 state championships in a row. So I have got to see them do that. But baseball up here in the North Shore, that's one of the things, and I wanted to get into this one. You know, one of the biggest things that stunk about this whole pandemic thing is missing these seniors. Up here in the North Shore, we had 4 or 5 really good baseball teams and 4 or 5 really good softball teams that I think we're going to be able to make a run at state championships. And I think for St. Tammany especially, it was going to be a really good year to see what these teams could do. And if they could make the run, Hannon had won the state championship in softball last year. St. Paul's won it in baseball last year in Division I. And we had some other schools. Mandeville was going to be really good in baseball. North Shore was going to be really good in baseball. And so I was really looking forward to seeing what this special senior class could do. Mandeville and North Shore both also in softball had a chance to make a run, and we missed all that. So, you know, at least we got to finish the basketball season, and I'm happy for that. Although this is the first time in 7 years that I didn't get to go to the state championships, just because different circumstances and with the pandemic coming down, and I started switching my attention to baseball and softball. So I missed going to Lake Charles in the Burton Coliseum, and man, it was tough because I love high school basketball, and it just wasn't the same this year.
Do you cover a lot of high school football as well?
Football is number one, and that's one of the things with VSM Louisiana and doing the broadcast end of it. We are trying. I mean, and look, and you talk about going back to asking about being a sports guy. You have got to love football. If you don't love football in Louisiana, you're gonna have a tough time making it around here. And so, football is number one. It's number one business wise. It's number one attention wise. When you guys start getting into metrics and paying attention to how many people click on your videos and if you write anything and read, you'll see that football drives the ship. So football has been number one for me for a long time. And I've been, you know, after a little hiatus, I came back in 2013, and football has been number one since I've come back for sure. That's where I've spent probably 75% of my focus.
So is Iverson Celestine the best running back on the North Shore?
Without a doubt. Especially going into this year, finally a senior. It seems like he's been at Fontainebleau forever. And, you know, we'll see what happens and where he ends up going when it's over with. But, you know, he's going to shatter. He's already broken most of the Fontainebleau records, and he's going to shatter every record there is there. But he's the real deal. And if you get a chance to go see him play this year, you definitely should try to, because I don't think he's just the best running back on the North Shore. I think he's the best player on the North Shore this year for sure. You know, last year Christian Westcott was Mr. Gatorade. It was Gatorade Player of the Year at Lakeshore, so it would hard to be to top that. And we'll see if he's a candidate for that this year. But Devin Brumfield, I'm thinking 2 years ago. But Iverson Celestine is definitely the best player up here this year, and I can't wait to see what he can do.
Okay. That's tight. Well, he actually supposed to be coming on the show.
Is he?
Huh?
Is he? Well, I tell him I think he's a candidate for 2,000 yards this year. I'm not going to put any pressure on him, but he's got a shot at it.
Okay. Wow. Do you feel like some sports? I mean, like social media outlets like Twitter, Instagram, kind of affect sports journalism, you know, a little maybe?
It's definitely it's unquestionably affected the way we do things over the past 5 years for sure. And we have to generate. I mean, that's one thing about going into the broadcasting side more. And we started doing it when I was at Thomas McCune, and we would do radio broadcasts. But one of the main things was always going out and trying to video everything that we do more video interviews, and not just the written story. And that's what, you know, people your age, they want to see it. They don't want to just read it. They want to see it. And so that's what we've tried to do more. And social media has affected all of that. And us old guys, some of us have adjusted and some of us haven't. And I try to pride myself on being one of the guys that has, especially with Twitter and to some extent Facebook, but I'm still getting there with Instagram. I haven't quite figured everything out with Instagram yet, but social media is obviously, I think, the number one thing that has affected sports journalism over the past 5 to 6 years for sure. And I know it will only take a stronger hold going forward.
So I know you've been in the sports field 30 years. I know you've been in the game 30 years. But what age did you actually fall in love with sports to want to pursue it as a career?
I didn't know I wanted to do it as a career until I started doing it. I don't know if I just thought it was if I thought it was possible. Now, when I was in college, I was going to school to be a teacher because I wanted to coach. And somewhere along the way, I took a couple journalism classes and just kind of fell into it. And I started back in 1990 writing some prep stories here and there, but mostly I was doing what they call an ag clerk, which you guys, I'm sure, don't know what that is because they really don't exist anymore. But it's the person who helped put together the little numbers. They take the box scores from all the games, and they'd have a whole page. It was a scoreboard page. You guys probably don't even know what that is because I don't even think we've done that in a while. But it would have a whole page of little tiny numbers, agate type, which is 6-point type, very small type of all the statistics and box scores and stat leaders and all those things. And we put all those things together. And so that's how I got started in the business. And at some point I realized that I could make this my profession. And I spent a long time on the desk before I ended up being a writer full time. And it just ended up working out for me. But as far as passion and love of sports, I learned that early on. My grandfather was a huge sports fanatic, and I started watching sports. My dad too, to some extent, probably when I was 5 or 6 years old, and it was always number one on my list since I was a kid. I mean, everything revolved around sports. Even the video games I played back in the day were all sports related. I played, I wanted to play John Elway football, and I wanted to play, Mike Tyson boxing, and I wanted to play, the baseball game, and those were my things. So sports has always been my passion. I didn't know it would be my career probably until I was probably about 25 or 26 years old, and I got lucky.
So how do you feel about the NFL expanding the league, this expanding the season, an extra game?
Well, I think it's a long time coming, to be honest. Obviously the players have some reservations because they are afraid what it will do to them and what it will do to their bodies and the toll that it takes to have an extra game or maybe eventually extra 2 games. But if you're taking away some of the preseason games, I think it will help in the long run. It will benefit will benefit the league. And I think it will benefit the players in the long run as well, too, because if they're playing more games, obviously they're going to end up being able to sign larger contracts. What it will do to the wear and tear of the player today, because obviously the game is played harder today than it's ever been played. So that will need to be seen. But I like the step that they've taken to talk about doing it with 1 game first to see if that works, and then maybe eventually going to an 18-game schedule. But I don't see the need for preseason. I would like to see preseason just taken away. I'd rather see them play maybe a couple scrimmages here and there and eventually have an 18-game season with no preseason and maybe a little bit longer training camp. I think that would work better for everybody. We'll see how it works, but I'm definitely in favor of an expanded season. All the while saying I understand why some players aren't.
So are you a diehard Saints fan?
I've been a Saints fan since I was as far back as I can remember. Back in the day, not trying to date myself again, but back in the day when we only had 4 or 5 channels and there was no cable TV, the Saints would be blacked out at home because they didn't sell out. And if you didn't sell out, or even still, they always sell out, and so you don't have to worry about it. But back in the day when you didn't sell out, you couldn't see it on TV, so you had to listen to the radio, or my dad would climb up onto the roof and he'd like do something with the antenna, and we would try to get the station from Lafayette. So we'd see like this snowy picture of the football game, you know, back in the day when Archie Manning was playing. So yeah, I've been a Saints fan since I was little, but it's hard to be a Saints fan in this profession because you are supposed to be neutral when you're covering a team, even if it's your home team. It's different. When I'm at home watching a game, I'm a fan. But when I'm in the dome press box covering the team, it's hard, but you try to pull yourself away from that as much as possible. Not easy to do in games like the NFC Championship when you're standing in the tunnel and you're getting ready for your interviews and the no call happens. That's not easy to pull yourself away from being a fan. But yeah, I've been a Saints fan and I've followed them since as far back as I can remember. Like I said, back in the days when Archie Manning was quarterback. So that's a long time ago.
So, from your opinion, I just want to hear from a diehard Saints fan. So, how do you feel about what Drew Brees said? You know, about the comment. Me personally, I'm staying neutral with it because I honestly, really, man, everybody is entitled to feel how you feel. I done had people, in the military as well. So I do really kind of understand where he's coming from, but also I understand as well, what he said, I kind of wasn't feeling it, because a person gonna stand up for what
Right.
stand up and believe in, and several people doing it, but do you feel like that shook the locker room up? You know what I'm saying?
I think what he said today in his apology, kind of, and I wouldn't say help. I think what he said today was a lot better than what he said yesterday. Put it that way. I think what we all have to realize and be sensitive to, and it's, we have to all realize that today is harder for us to express our emotions or express our feelings today than it was 10 years ago. And that's not a bad thing, because I think through this whole process, we will learn how to express how we feel. But at the same time, we have to be sensitive to what's going on in this country. And one thing that is going on in this country is I liken this, and I was just a little kid, and I don't remember this back in the late 60s when, there was unrest and violence. That's what today kind of is. I mean, I think it's kind of a revolution, so to speak. And I think, it's never cool when old farts like me use new words, but getting woke. I mean, that's what I think a lot of us need to do. And I think Drew Brees learned something yesterday. And he got backlash pretty quickly by people who maybe didn't understand, he maybe didn't understand quite what's going on. And not that I understand fully, because I've never been in your shoes.
Right.
I can only listen to what you tell me, and I can try to, we can try to become more understanding of what's going on, and that needs to be done. And so hopefully Drew learned his lesson from yesterday, and needs to be a little bit more sensitive about what's going on. And I think he did. But at the same time, though, I will say that I would like people to understand at the same time, I can understand where he's coming from. And you talking about being part of the military. I mean, my dad was served in Vietnam. So the flag has always been a big deal to me. So I have major mixed emotions. I understand both sides, and it's hard to it's hard to knock either side. If that's possible, if that's even possible. I mean, you can understand why some people who don't like the whole disrespect of the flag, but at the same time, I don't think a lot of us understand why Colin Kaepernick took a knee in the first place, and we need to start understanding why.
Right. You're right, man. You're right, bro. Like, I'm exactly, that's why I'm met with it too. Like, I don't knock either side. Honestly, some things ain't supposed to be said, but I don't knock either side though.
Things need to be said. Things definitely need to be said. I mean, I think the only way things get worse, and it's hard for me because one thing that, you know, as a journalist, we're not supposed to go out and express our personal opinions on things, which makes it even harder because I've heard so many times people saying the only wrong answer is to be silent. And, you know, in a lot of ways, I agree with that. But at the same time, when, for me, it's hard to express my opinion on things because I don't want to sound like I'm taking sides because we're supposed to be journalists. Your superior city, you're taking sides, then that becomes a bigger issue. So it's like I'm caught in between two worlds. I understand where the movement is coming from, and I completely agree with it. But at the same time, how far can we go as journalists, even a sports writer? It's not that we're not supposed to have opinions. We're just not supposed to share them all that much. So we have to be careful about where we go there. But it's a tough time we're living in. But the only way that things are going to happen and things are going to get better is for all of us to talk about it.
All right. For my last question, what is your burning desire?
My burning desire. Well, honestly, my burning desire doesn't have anything to do with sports. My burning desire is to see my children grow up. I don't have an answer for that. My children to grow up in a world that is a lot different than the one that we're living in right now. My burning desire is for my children and my family to be try to be models, and for my girls to be grow up and be a big part of society, and whatever path they choose, for me to be able to help them, because that's where my life is right now. As much as I love sports and as much as I want to do this for the rest of my life, one of the questions you didn't ask that were on here is, do I hope to be on ESPN? I never hope to be on ESPN, honestly. I love doing what I do. I love watching kids play sports because it is a passion for them, and that's what my desire is, to see my kids be as passionate about it as something as the kids that I cover on a daily basis are, because I watch these kids play sports, man, and there is nothing better than watching a kid hoist a trophy that he worked months and months and months for, or she worked months and months and months for. I'm human, and I look, kids that I cover, when they lose, sometimes I shed a tear with them. I mean, I'm not supposed to, but I'm human. Kids that win, I'm not supposed to be, in the middle of everything, but sometimes I can't help but be super ecstatic for them. So that's what I want for my kids, and that's my desire right now. My desire is that hopefully my kids will be a part. If it's not sports, it's fine. If it's something else, that's great too. But just to be contributing to society, and for me to be able to watch them do that, and maybe walk them up the aisle one day.
Ruff, it's on you.
So as you mentioned earlier, you've been a sports journalist for 30 years, which means you have seen a lot of great talent come through the state of Louisiana. Could you possibly give us a top 5 list of players? I know it's going to be difficult, but a top 5 list of players that you have seen come out of the state of Louisiana at the high school level, high school football.
We just did a thing on VSN Louisiana where we had a poll, and we put together these lists of the greatest running backs, the greatest quarterbacks, and the greatest wide receivers of all time in the state of Louisiana. And I'll tell you, not only was it tough narrowing it down to the 32 or the 36, we expanded the brackets for the quarterbacks and receivers. Excuse me. But it was tough narrowing it down to 85 or 90 to narrow down the second list. So to narrow down 5 is tough. But I will tell you that I think the greatest football player that I've ever seen in person, and all I can do is judge by what I've seen in person, not who might have played before me or while I was in high school. But the greatest player I ever saw play high school football was Leonard Fournette. And I think it's we
told people this, bro. In my head, I said, nah, watch this man say Leonard Fournette. That's
It's
what
got
everybody
to be.
love,
I mean,
bro.
I'm gonna tell you a little story about my first encounter with Leonard Fournette. So, I was working on the news side for a while, okay, and I got put back on Prep Sports in 2013 when Leonard was going to be a senior, and so I didn't know I spent 7 years away from the game, so I I hadn't had a lot of time to pay attention to the ins and outs. Obviously, knew who Leonard Fournette was, but I had never seen him in person. Okay, so it's week 2 of the 2013 season in St. Aug's, going to Covington. Okay, so I'm covering the game, and I don't know if you've ever been to Covington, but they have the highest press box of any high school stadium I've ever been to. And so I climb up all the way to the top, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, and I start looking at the program, and I'm like, they don't have their jerseys on yet. I'm like, I wonder if I could figure out who Leonard. Oh, there he is. I mean, while we were in warm-ups, from the top of the press box at Jack Salter Stadium, I could pick out who Leonard Fournette was in warm-ups with no jersey on. He was a different kind of player. He was a man playing a boys' game, and that's who Leonard was. And so he's clearly number one on my list. 2 through 5, 2 through 15, really. I think you could kind of like throw up in a hat and kind of pick one. And I'm gonna give you a name. And I fought for this kid to be on our top 32 list. And I wasn't going to leave that Zoom meeting until I made sure he's in our top 32. But he doesn't get the pub that he deserves. And that is Covington. Speaking of Covington, Devin Brumfield. And I don't know if you ever guys got to see him, but he graduated a few years ago. 2017 was his senior season, or 16. I can't. They're all blend together. But Devin Brumfield, as an 8th grader, Coach Greg Salter told me, I got this kid coming up, and coaches tell you this stuff all the time. I got this kid coming up. Man, he's going to be the future of this program. He's going to make Covington great again. They're going to be special. We're going to be special. I'm like, okay, coach. So he's telling me about him all year long. Summer camp, freshman year. This kid's a 9th grader, okay? He's making seniors look dumb. I mean, and so you could tell he would be something special. And for 4 years, Devin Brumfield was special, and he was a special kind of player that I loved playing. I loved watching Puka Williams over in Hanville. Puka had moves like – now, look, Leonard might have been the greatest running back I ever saw, but I don't know that I ever saw anybody have moves like Anthony Puka Williams had. I mean, you didn't want to kick the ball off to Anthony Puka Williams because more times than not he was going to be gone. And they stopped kicking it to him. A couple times they made a mistake, and he was gone. But and quarterbacks go, and I said this a couple of weeks ago, and I meant it. I think, and I've seen some great quarterbacks play. Now, my first year in the business, Peyton Manning was a sophomore. That tells you at Newman. That tells you how old I am. Okay, so the best high school quarterback I ever saw was Keaton Thompson and Landry Walker. And we covered him in a state championship game against West Monroe. And my color man was Nick Saltzman-Maggio, who's now the coach at Holy Cross, okay? And Coach Salt's sitting next to me. Keaton makes this just unbelievable play. It's a tight game at this point. I think it's third quarter, where he rolls out to the right. He's got 2 guys hanging on him, about to bring his jersey down. He stands up, takes another step, and fires a dart across the middle of the field for a touchdown. And I said, how does that happen? And Coach Salt says, I'll give you 3 letters, SEC. That's an SEC player playing against a bunch of boys. And it was a lot like Leonard in a way, except it wasn't throughout his career. I think Keaton was a better football player in his junior, senior year. He was a great basketball player. His sophomore year, he won the state championship for Landry Walker with an unbelievable last-second shot against Salmon that Coach Jay Carlin is still upset about. But he was the best. I think he was the best quarterback I've ever seen. So I mean, but we could talk about high school players all day. But it's funny because really, to me, the greatest high school players I've seen have been in the past, 7-8 years since I've come back. It's hard to compare the guys that I covered back in the 90s to the guys that are playing now. It's completely different. I mean, an average athlete today would have been a dominant athlete, I think, back in the 1990s. That's how it is. I mean, they play football all year round. They work out all year round. It wasn't that way back then.
Definitely. What are your thoughts on a quarterback from Salmon? He played some years back, Daniel Sams, that went to Kansas State.
Yeah.
He was a pretty good as well.
He was very good, but they had a guy last year, Michael Marco, who was and Salmon hasn't got a lot of pub lately because they haven't been good the past 6 or 7 years, except for maybe one season. They had a season a couple years ago where they were 9-1 in the regular season, made it to the quarterfinals. But Michael Marco from last year, and he didn't get a lot of pub, but he was really going to be a running back. He was supposed to be a running back. He ended up playing running back, quarterback, and he played on the defensive side of the ball. And I wish Salmon would have been a little bit better to see how good this kid was, because he had a lot of moves. He just didn't have a lot of people to protect for him, and they didn't have enough around him. And Salmon only had like 52 guys on their roster last year. But Sams was a great player. Salmon's had a lot of great players over the years. That's one of the most underrated programs over the past, I think, 30 years, the Salmon Spartans, for sure.
Definitely. So as you mentioned earlier as well, you love basketball. You love to cover basketball. Could you tell us about the legendary coach from Peabody High School, Coach Charles Smith, who was, I believe, coached at a McDonald's All-American game? Would you say that he changed the face of Louisiana basketball, so to speak?
I think he's in the neighborhood of the J.T. Curtis of basketball. He just became the state's all-time winningest coach this past postseason, as a matter of fact. And now, obviously, with Peabody being in the Alexandria area, I don't get to cover them a lot, but I see them every year because they're always there. And he's a special guy, man. He really is. And in my limited dealings with him, to me, all great coaches have this thing, this aura around them, and he certainly has that. And change the face of basketball, yeah, I think he has. Peabody is always it doesn't matter. Most teams, they have turnover, and they might have years where even the good coaches they'll have 18, 19 wins, 20 wins maybe. Peabody's always up there in the 30 category, and he found a way to make a public school a dominant force, which is not easy to do in today's game. He has certainly changed the game for sure.
Definitely. Now, since we're on the topic of basketball, I would like to switch to the NBA. Mm-hmm. As we all know, last season, Kawhi Leonard was absolutely unstoppable. His ability to get to his spots, the clutch factor, the way he's able to play on both sides of the court is second to none.
No doubt.
Would you say that he has surpassed LeBron James as the best basketball player in the world?
I think that's tough. No. I think Kawhi Leonard is a fantastic player, but obviously he's had issues with injuries, especially over the past 3 to 4 years. And, he's now on his third team in 3 years. Not that it has anything to do with how great he is. Obviously did a lot for Toronto last year, but I still think LeBron James is the best player in the game today. You can debate whether he's the greatest player of all time or not. He's certainly in a conversation. But even at 34, 35 years old, or however old he is, he's one of the greatest athletes that's ever suited up in any sport. So I think Kawhi, when he's at his best, is certainly up there, and he does everything. But I think I still think LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of today.
Definitely.
Don't get me started on all time, because anybody who says MJ isn't the greatest player of all time, we're gonna have problems.
Right. And just to add a little bit on to that, I'm 24 years of age. So 96 and all of those years in the 90s when they were doing their thing,
right.
I was very young. So the Last Dance documentary really gave me a representation of what it was like. I felt like I was, a part of the 90s culture, and being able to see how he just separated himself so far from everyone, because before watching the documentary, I had LeBron as the best player to ever play the game. After watching the documentary, I changed my mind. You know, I
Really?
definitely
You
have.
changed your
I
mind?
definitely. What's that?
You changed your mind?
Yes, I definitely did. I definitely did. I felt as if I owe that respect to Michael Jordan. You know, the fear he put in people, as I mentioned earlier, his ability to separate himself from everyone else. And, you know, as we all know, the greatest closer to ever play the game of basketball,
There,
by far.
there is no question that's true. And I'm going to tell you, I was a teenager. I was lucky enough to see MJ play with North Carolina in the national championship game in 1982, back in the Dome, back when they used to play basketball in the Dome, and they had 70-something thousand people in the Dome. And so, but to me, and you talk about closer, and to me, that's what makes him the greatest. I don't think Michael Jordan's just the greatest basketball player that's ever lived. I think Michael Jordan's the greatest athlete who's ever lived. I don't think there's anyone better in any sport. And you can include Babe Ruth, Ted Williams, Joe Montana, Tom Brady. You could talk about anybody. You could talk if you're a horse racing fanatic and you think Secretariat. You could throw Jack Nicklaus and Tiger Woods in there. No one was better at their craft than Michael Jordan, and people forget that he played baseball too. He wasn't the greatest baseball player, but he could have played Major League Baseball if he wanted to.
Right.
But when it was coming down, and the thing I'll always remember about MJ was if the game was on the line, number one, you knew who was getting the ball, and number two, you knew it was over, and he didn't miss. And that's the difference between him and LeBron. LeBron, when it comes down to closing seconds, it's not always going to be him that's going to take the last shot. Not that that's a bad thing, but he'll dish it off, and when he takes it, it's not always going in. MJ, it's always going in. It's always going to be him. He always made it. So that to me, that's the difference.
Definitely. On the 2017-2018 Golden State Warriors, you know, they always are talked about as being one of the better teams to ever play basketball. You know, my opinion is they are the best team to ever play basketball. Do you feel as if there was a team throughout the history of basketball, regardless of the era, that could beat those guys in a 7-game series with, let's just say, everyone remaining healthy, KD included?
Speaking of that, I guess you don't hold it against KD for going to play for Golden State then.
I do, but at the same time, I don't. I feel as if it doesn't take away from how great of a player he is, but it does have it will always have a stain because of the competitive mindset. You know, I can't say he was as competitive as Michael Jordan was. You know.
Oh, yeah, definitely not. But
I can't say that. But as far as, you know, just as a basketball player and his overall talent, I can't take that away from him. But the competitive spirit, it will have a stain. It would always have a stain.
I could never hold it against somebody for wanting to go get themselves a ring or two, and that's what he was going to do. I hate to be repetitive, but I think that some of those teams, and I don't want to single out a certain year, but I think the Bulls back in the 90s, to me, were the same. I mean, obviously their style was different. They were a little bit more bullish. They were a little bit more aggressive, but that's how basketball was back then.
Right.
But to me, those Bulls teams were the best teams that I've ever seen. And I'm not taking anything away from Golden State the past couple. Look, basketball's changed to where you can make those kind. It was a lot harder to make those kinds of teams back in the 90s because they wanted more parity. I don't think the NBA even cares about parity. I think they care about the entertainment value. And I'm okay with that, but I think it's more about entertainment. But I think back then, those Bulls teams had to go up against, and I know you saw some of the bad boys and the Pistons back in the day, just going up against those guys and what it was like to go against the Jazz and going up against Stockton and Malone, and you know, and you can say teams like that today, but to me, there was more of a gauntlet for them to go through. But you never felt like if the Bulls, you know, if they avoided injury, that you knew they were going to win a championship, kind of like the Warriors of a couple years ago, but I just think to me that was the best team, or at least the best era. 4 or 5 or 6 years of basketball for one team that I ever saw.
Definitely. So I would like to switch the focus to the Saints for a minute.
Uh-huh.
They had some key acquisitions, in the off season with Emmanuel Sanders and Malcolm Jenkins.
Yeah.
Do you feel as if this team is built for a Super Bowl run now that they have a second receiver, and also not to forget about the draft picks, the guy Adam Trotman, the tight end.
Love him.
I think that guy's gonna be special. So you finally, Jared Cook's a good tight end, but now I think we have a tight end that can block and go over the middle and catch passes. Big. He imposes his will on people. So I feel as if Drew Brees has the complete offense this year. And they solidified some spots on the offensive line as well. Do you feel as if this team is built for a championship run?
I think this team is as good as it's been the past couple of years. And I don't think it's better. They've gotten better in spots, but I think they're maybe a little lacking in others. And this is not going to be a popular thing, but I'm not a fan of Drew Brees going on. I'm worried about Drew Brees making it through a 16-game season. I know they brought Jameis Winston in, but who's going to be the next quarterback? I felt more comfortable with Teddy there. Teddy's not going to throw 30 interceptions.
Right.
Teddy was the perfect backup for where we were, because the Saints need a quarterback. If Drew goes down, to me, they need a quarterback that's just not going to make mistakes. Let everybody else do the work. And that's what Teddy was, and that's why Teddy was successful.
Yeah.
And it scares me that Jameis Winston. And I just don't see Drew Brees making it through a whole season. If he does, he proves me wrong. Great. So that's a worry of mine. Is Alvin Kamara going to come back from whatever problems he's had? Obviously, that injury that he had, high ankle sprains are never a good thing for an athlete. Obviously, that lingered with him the whole season. That worries me. And just the Larry Warford's out in the O-line. We drafted a center in the first round. Are we going to move McCoy to right tackle? So there's lots of questions. All those things being said, I think the Saints are a championship contender. Obviously, Las Vegas thinks that way because they're the number one team. They have the lowest odds to win the NFC. So Vegas thinks that they're the best team in the NFC. And I think they only have Baltimore and Kansas City with worse odds as far as going into winning the Super Bowl. So yes, they're a championship contender, but I think this division is going to be so tough this year, and not just because Tom Brady's with the Bucs. It's not just that. I think people are sleeping on Atlanta, and we hate to say it as Saints fans. You don't ever want to talk good about the Falcons, but I think they were a good team that had a lot of issues last year, and I think they're starting to figure things out. Devontae Freeman obviously wasn't the greatest fit for them, and now they got Todd Gurley. I think they're going to have a completely different season. So I think you're talking about 3 teams in the NFC South that, to me, all not only could make it to the playoffs, but make a run. And Tampa's scary with those receivers now that Tom Brady's there. And they got a pretty decent defense, too. Teddy's going to be fighting an uphill battle in Carolina. But I think the Saints are a championship contender, but they got to make it out of the NFC South. And it's going to be a fight, just like it was for LSU in the SEC last year, and it is for Alabama just about every other year. I think the winner of the NFC South has a leg up and is going to be a strong contender to win the Super Bowl, for sure.
Definitely. Now, you mentioned Jameis Winston earlier. As we all know, he has a lot of talent, former number 1 overall pick. But the decision-making was a concern. Do you feel as if with a coach a coach as with the pedigree of Sean Payton and a top tier quarterback in Drew Brees, do you feel as if that locker room, that quarterback room, can mold Jameis Winston and get the best out of his potential?
It's a tough one. My 22-year-old son and I have this argument constantly. We've had this argument for 2 months now. He thinks Jameis Winston is the best thing since sliced bread. He thinks he's the Saints quarterback for the next 12 years or whatever. And a guy that throws 30 interceptions in one season, to me, I'm not saying he can't be a starting quarterback because obviously he's got talent.
Right.
So it will be interesting to see what Sean Payton can do to him. I just don't see him being the future of the Saints at quarterback. And you know what? I hope I'm wrong because to me, he's got all the tools that he needs. I just don't know if he is going to be able to change his habits. I mean, it's hard to change habits. If you're throwing 30 interceptions, of course, Brett Favre threw a lot of interceptions in his career. I think he's the all-time leader in interceptions. And he ended up being okay. But I don't know. It worries me a little bit. But hey, I think he's going to get. You're going to find out. Because just like Teddy got a chance to play 5 games last year, I'd be shocked if Jameis Winston doesn't start 4 to 6 games for the Saints this year. Even if it's just to give Drew Brees rest or to see what Jameis can do, and you hate doing that during the season, but Drew Brees can't play 16 games to be effective in the playoffs. Jameis Winston's going to have to play. We're going to find out, and he's going to be the number 2 quarterback.
Definitely. For my last question, where do you have Drew Brees ranked on your all-time list of quarterbacks?
Man, that's tough. He's in the top 5 for sure. I am not a Tom Brady as the GOAT guy because, again, we'll go back old school, and it's just not just because I'm old school, but I think Joe Montana is the greatest quarterback that ever lived. He was like MJ in the sense of, and Elway was a lot like that. If they needed a drive, and Tom Brady, don't get me wrong, he's done it time and time again, but Joe Montana, if you needed a drive with 1 minute and 40 seconds to go and you were on your own 20, you were pretty sure that it was going to happen. And Drew is similar, but he's got all the numbers, and he's in my top 5. I just don't think he's ahead of Brady. I don't think he's ahead of Montana. I don't think he's ahead of Elway. So maybe number 4, somewhere along those lines. But he's a surefire Hall of Famer. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I thank God almost every day as a Saints fan that Dante Culpepper signed with Miami. Otherwise, and Nick Saban didn't want Drew Brees because who knows what would have happened with this franchise. Right. It would have changed the entire future. And, I mean, you think about it. You said you're 24 years old. I mean, so 15 years ago, all you know is Drew Brees. So, and I tell it to my 22-year-old son who's thinking about the future of Jameis Winston. All he knows is Drew Brees. So it's going to be weird when Drew's gone, but he's up there, top 5 for sure. I just don't know where he ranks after my top 3.
Definitely. So, Mr. Derry, can you give us your social media platforms so people can follow you?
Absolutely. At Jim Derry Jr., DERRY, at Jim Derry Jr. on Twitter. Right now, we're doing a lot of stuff. Really, I'm doing most of my stuff at VSN Louisiana. We're about to continue our countdown of the greatest players in Louisiana high school football history. We're going to the defense next. We took a little break. A couple of us actually, not together, but we went to the beach. We took a little time off. Got to spend some quality time with my family. So it's back to the grind, and hopefully the LHSA makes an announcement real soon, and we can get back to knowing that high school football is going to come back and start on time, and hopefully we're able to see that. So, but at Jim Derry Jr. on Twitter is the best way to follow me.
Yes, sir. Well, Mr. Derry, it's been a pleasure having you on Diamond in the Rough Sports Talk. We thank you again, and we're going to be looking forward to that defensive list.
Yes, sir.
Back at you guys. I thank both of y'all for having me on, and it's been a pleasure. Anytime.
Yes, sir. Well, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that will conclude episode 39 of Diamond in the Rough Sports Talk. Thank you.
See you guys.
See you
Thank you
later.
very
Thank
much.
you.